Hello, and welcome to the AOPA Air Safety Institute presents Airworthiness Records, a guide for owners and pilots. My name is John Collins, and I am the manager of aviation safety programs for the AOPA Air Safety Institute and your host for this webinar. A few things to help you have a good experience tonight. Please make sure that you've muted your microphones. And if you have any technical issues, we're not actually able to troubleshoot them during the webinar, but logging out and logging back in usually will cure audio issues. If you have lags in the video, we are recording tonight, so you'll be able to see a full stream of it tomorrow. We'll take questions throughout the presentation and answer as many as we can before the end of the webinar. We have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. Use the question mark on your PC or laptop control panel located on the right side of your screen, or the question mark at the top of your screen on your tablet or smartphone to submit them. The slides in this presentation this evening are numbered, and to facilitate answering the questions, please refer to the slide number in your question. We recommend having material handy to take notes on and perhaps a second device to look up references. Take screenshots as needed, and although we are recording this webinar, we'll have it up on our site at webinars.aopa.org tomorrow. Screenshots are always good to go back and zoom in on stuff. Wings credit is available for the webinar, and if you signed up for this webinar with your FAA Wings account, you'll receive credit automatically to your account within the next few days. And for those of you that are using the AOPA Pilot Passport, a part of the AOPA app, attendance at this webinar will earn you an ASI webinar badge and 1,000 points. I'll have more on that at the end of the webinar. Tonight's presenter is aircraft owner and CFII Mike Montefusco. Welcome back, Mike. You have the controls.
Great, thank you, John. You switch over to me here if you would, please.
Yep.
And
Yep.
Okay, so let's see. I'll pull this up and show screen. Can you see my screen yet, John?
Not yet, Mike.
Okay, let's see here. I'm recording. Okay, there's nothing happening with the show screen button.
No.
Have you made me the presenter?
You are the presenter?
Okay. Okay, I am, okay, now I've got it. Here we go.
Okay, got it.
Can you see? You got it now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is Mike Montefusco. We're going to talk about airworthiness and aircraft records, which sounds like a boring subject, but I guarantee you, if you pay attention here, I think you're going to find this to be somewhat interesting and actually thought-provoking. I'm calling this a parenting class for aircraft renters, owners, operators, and maintainers, because it's really that. It's the things we never really learned about when we got our pilot's certificate or our maintainer certificate, in terms of depth of knowledge of our responsibilities for owning an airplane or parenting an airplane. We learned how to fly the airplane. We learned about tactile skills. We learned about regulations, physiology, weather, but we never learned a lot, for most people that I've come across, about the responsibilities of becoming an owner. And even more basic, many of you are not owners, but what are your responsibilities if you're just a renter? There are actually some interesting things that come up with rental operations, and we're going to discuss that also. I encourage your questions and look forward to them at the end of the program. And as John said, the slides are numbered, so we'll go through that and would appreciate your thoughts and feedback. This is me. Real quick, you can see some of the different airplanes. I actually don't have the jet fighters on here, and I don't have the airliners. Been around the patch a few times. The picture on the bottom right is my gyrocopter, which I built and fly for about 2 years now. I have about 340 hours and just about 2 years of flying time in it. And this is not the important part of the presentation. This is the important part of the presentation, which is the program. So there's quite a lot of information in this subject area. There's so much information that it would be, in my estimation, completely overwhelming to try to cover the material in a single session. So for sanity purposes, I've divided up the presentation into logical chunks. This is sort of like the old proverbial, how do you eat an elephant question? It's one bite at a time. So we're going to take 4 bites of this elephant and cover a myriad of subjects. So this is the typical schedule that you will see in any presentation, but I'd like to take you a different look at it. We're going to take a journey during these 4 webinars. We're going to start up here in the Pacific Northwest with the multi-$1,000 question. The question is, why are we doing this? It's the multi-$1,000 question. From there, we're going to go on and talk about the relationship between aircraft records and maintenance records. We'll talk briefly about that. From that point, we'll fold that into discussion of something we all learned at the very beginning, which is the ARROW acronym, and talk about what some of those things might really mean to us in terms of our day-to-day flying and our competency and safety approach to flying, regardless of whether you're a private, non-professional pilot or you're a professional pilot. We'll talk about some things that owners need to know and should know, and believe it or not, they don't know from personal experience. We'll talk about specific things renters clearly don't know and do not know about what they're doing. And I've got some interesting stories to tell you about there, what happens in that place. Then we're going to talk about some of the documents that are part and parcel of the records for an aircraft that you may or may not know about. The first one that seems to be a mystery to a large number of people is something called a TCDS, which means a Type Certificate Data Sheet. We'll discuss what that is, where it comes from, where it started, why it's important, and its relationship to some of the other documents. It's the basis for understanding this whole subject area. After the TCDS, we'll go in more detail to airworthiness directives. Then we'll talk about aircraft service bulletins. From there, we'll add on some knowledge or some thoughts about supplemental type certificates and what they are. Then we'll talk about some other subjects here and there that sort of fill in the rest of the blanks that we have. We'll put all this information together in some type of a format. I put a loose leaf book together, but a book is the term that I'm using. It really doesn't matter how you collect the information that might be relevant to your aircraft. I used a book. You could have it in file folders and shoe boxes. It really is not important as long as there is some system that you have that makes sense to you and the way you think about things and has some logic to it and has some completeness to it, and it's all in the right place or in your mind that you can access it when you need it. And from there, if we get all through that, I'm going to offer some bonus materials at the end of the fourth webinar. Now, you're not required to attend all 4 webinars, but they are all very highly linked and they're all interrelated. And I've laid them out because it's a building block approach to understanding how this whole piece of aircraft ownership and life cycle and support and airworthiness relates to each other and how it's going to relate to you, regardless of whether you're an owner or a renter, whether you're the pilot in command or the maintainer, how these things all fit together. So with that in mind, let's start with the multi-$1,000 questions. And I call this the multi-$1,000 questions because I hope to impress upon you that the knowledge of these items that we just spoke about has great potential value to you in the care and feeding of the aircraft that you operate or maintain. If you're an owner, you have a capital investment. If you're a renter, you have a vested interest in ensuring that the aircraft that you take responsibility for from the rental agency is in fact an airworthy airplane. Not only physically airworthy, of course, that's the highest near-term priority in your mind, but legally. Are the documents there? Do you even know what the condition of the aircraft is? Should there be a mishap or an accident? Unfortunately, we don't want that to happen. but are you left out in the cold because your responsibility as the pilot in command was to do some due diligence to verify the aircraft was airworthy? And did you do that? Well, let me point out some things that maybe you want to think about the next time you rent an aircraft. So here's the multi-$1,000 questions. We're going to set the stage by saying, here's some old phrases you remember. Remember this thing? Curiosity did what to the cat? And of course, most of you remember it. This is pretty easy. Curiosity did what? Curiosity killed the cat. Okay, let's take one more step. Let's do this one. Curiosity did what to my bacon? Curiosity saved my bacon. So I'm inviting you in this webinar to be curious. And I'm proposing that if you are curious and follow along what's going on here, there is a really high potential it's going to save your bacon one day. So the multi-$1,000 questions, here they go.
Hey, Mike, before you get into the multi-$1,000 questions, we've had some folks reporting some audio issues. Could you adjust the microphone away from your mouth just a little bit?
Sure.
I think that might help. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that a little better? Does that sound better?
So. Yes. Yes, it does.
Thank you. Okay, the multi-$1,000 questions. Here we go. What would it mean to you, renter, owner, maintainer? What would it mean to you if you could reduce the cost of airplane ownership? Now, you can be a renter here, but when you rent the airplane, for that period of time, you basically figuratively own it, at least, because you're responsible for it. So we talk about reducing the cost of airplane ownership. We're going to be talking about the operating costs and the maintenance costs. There's actually a third cost here, but we're usually not talking about that at this point. And that's the original acquisition cost, whether it's a new or used airplane, and this obviously can be a balloon, a helicopter, or anything else in between. The acquisition part of it is when you first buy it. But then the bigger equation and the thing that becomes more meaningful is the day-to-day operating costs and then the maintenance costs. And how you handle this, this knowledge information we're talking about, it can have a big impact in your being able to control and manage both the operating and maintenance costs of the aircraft. Another thing we could look at, we could say, what would it mean to you if you could increase the attractiveness and the total value and selling price of your aircraft? Now, you know, we all are enamored with buying an airplane, owning it, and, you know, pounding our chest and say, look, I'm an airplane owner. At some point in your life, or the life of your aircraft, it's going to be time to move on, just like you change cars periodically. Most of us do anyway. You're going to want to sell that aircraft. And what you get for that airplane is going to depend a lot about how you operated it, how you maintained it, and if you have something tangible for a potential buyer to look at to verify your verbal claims of the condition of the aircraft. Not saying you're not going to have a pre-buy inspection. Of course, we're going to do that. But someone's going to have to put all the information together. You can wait until you do the pre-buy, which will make a pre-buy very expensive if it's scattered, or you can help the buyer buy the airplane by creating a value proposition that makes your aircraft at the time you want to sell it a much more attractive capital asset. So that's what I'm offering to you, a chance to think through the ownership responsibility from that standpoint. A third reason, what would it mean to you if you could address potential airworthiness or aircraft records inquiries? Now, most of us don't ever deal with that unless you have some type of a recordable incident. So that's not high on many people's minds, but it is a possibility. It would be sort of like a ramp check of your records. We don't see that happening very often unless there is an inquiry for some other reason. And maybe the fourth reason, what would it mean to you if you could minimize any potential losses after you had an incident or accident? So how do you have a loss? You have a loss from negligence because there are no ways to prove that certain things were done to the airplane, whether it was maintained properly, whether it was upkept properly, whether it was operated properly, because the records have never been set up and maintained during the lifetime of the airplane to facilitate answering those questions. Okay, so here's four reasons to think about this particular subject matter. And granted, 3 and 4 are probably not on our minds, but 1 and 2, yeah, there's a big reason here to think about airworthiness and aircraft records, the relationship between those two ideas in terms of operating costs, maintenance costs, and eventually the attractiveness of selling your capital asset and getting top value for it within, of course, within range, but getting more value for it than people typically get because their records are not even discernible. It's a uphill battle from the get-go. So we're going to focus on these first two ideas. Now, some goals of the presentation. In order to achieve this understanding and ability on aircraft records and airworthiness is to provide you with a basis of knowledge for more informed and effective communication with whoever does your maintenance. Having been an instructor for a long time, I've heard, and other people here who have been pilots or owners or instructors for a long time, just numerous horror stories of people who have been surprised with maintenance bills, with things they didn't understand because they did not know how to communicate properly with their vendor about what they need done, where the stop and start points are, how much things are going to cost. I'm going to give you information about how to do that in a better way. Some other goals. Again, we would like to potentially at least increase the aircraft resale value. Now, we're not going to do it on the aircraft directly. We're going to do it on the aircraft records because of the way you have collected and organized and tracked and are able to show aircraft records to a potential buyer. I offer you this thought from a gentleman from the 19th century, George Cantor. He said, a false conclusion once arrived at and widely accepted is not easily dislodged. And the less it is understood, the more tenaciously it is held. And the false conclusion is what? The false conclusion that many aircraft owners and pilots is one that they have come to accept. And that is the answer to the question, who specifically has the airworthiness, aircraft records, and maintenance responsibility for this capital asset? Having been, again, an instructor with one of the type clubs in the area, actually in one of the national type clubs, I can tell you that many of the aircraft owners believe it is their job is to own the airplane, and everything else besides owning and flying the airplane, keeping their operational skills up, everything else is their A&P's responsibility. It's their A&P's job to take care of everything, keep everything up to snuff, know what needs to be done, get it done, and tell them when something needs to happen. And they are basically hands off. And this happens all too frequently. So a little background, where is this coming from? I think it's important to kind of back up just a little bit and kind of set the stage for you. I had the good fortune to be an FAA safety team member for a number of years. Now, some of you have heard about the FAA safety team. FAA safety team members are not FAA employees. The safety team has a program manager, a FAST team, what they call a FAST team program manager. It's a single individual usually at a FSDO. Hold on just a moment. At the FSDO, and that person is a volunteer. I'm sorry, that person is an FAA employee, the person at the FSDO. Under that person are volunteers who may or may not be flight instructors. They're people in the community who have some experience in aviation, who volunteer their time to promote and encourage aviation safety and competency among the general population. And there are people that focus on operational issues, and there are people that focus on maintenance issues within the safety team. So during the time that I was on the safety team, I was fairly active doing presentations like this in front of live audiences at various airports all around this area, which is the area of North Texas where I am, doing to many of the aviation groups, many EAA chapters, AOPA organizations, just general pilot groups at different airports, and looking for material, say what would be a good subject to talk with this group of pilots about. And of course, the myriad of things we hear about is obviously people talk about accidents, they talk about density, altitude, they talk about airport traffic operations, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I tried to find some material that was not in the normal spectrum of things that people address during these types of safety programs. And there are actually quite a few things that are largely missed. We just don't spend much attention. I'll give you an example. There's a program that I've been doing for years on the real impact of carbon monoxide, because it'll kill you if you don't pay attention. And we really don't give that much credibility. But I got a chance to do a program with a maintenance person who I think is maybe one of the finest maintenance people that I've ever come across in this area. He was the chief of maintenance at a major corporation, he was in charge of many of their business jets. And he put his arm around me one day and said, Mike, there's a subject that we probably should talk about. And it's about this subject of airworthiness and aircraft records. And I had been flying over 40 years at that point. And Jack said, let me talk with you about a couple things. And he introduced me to this whole subject. And this is a few years ago now. And I was blown away because I had been flying for most of my life, most of my flying career, and I was blind. I had little or no knowledge about the subjects we're covering. And when he told me the way he did it and the importance of it just blew me away. And I said, this is an important message, and no one is paying attention to it. None of the professional organizations are doing it. The FAA is not doing it. The NTSB is not doing it. Nobody is educating the aviation population about these subjects. So he trained me. He did a hell of a job. And years later, as a result, is this presentation. So that's how it got started, because I was a volunteer on the FAST team for quite some time. Fast forward a couple of years, I want to talk about type clubs for different flying organizations. The Mooney Aircraft Pilots Association, Cessna Pilots. The one on top, you may not recognize that logo in the top center. That's the Pilatus Owners and Pilots Association. The Piper Flyers Bonanza Society, Cirrus Pilots Association, etc. What these people do is they as part of their focus, they try to present more in-depth material to owners of the particular types of airplanes about the care and feeding of the airplanes of the particular type that you're flying. So this is just a sample of some of the what they call type clubs that exist. And type clubs have a really good goal, and they do a great job. I got to fly Bonanzas for quite a long time. Never owned a Bonanza, but I got to fly Bonanzas, and actually was a member of the American Bonanza Society. So that's the type club. There's a little over 9,000 members in the ABS type club. And so I was doing that because I was instructing in Bonanzas, and then went to a school for Bonanza instructors, a specific school. And that was the ABS Flight Instructor Academy. So it takes you from the realm of a standard instructor, a general CFI or CFII, and it gives you some specialized knowledge in a particular type of airplane. And programs exist in other type clubs that are, I think, similar to this. Bonanza does an excellent job with their Flight Instructor Academy. It's very, very intense and very thorough. And the reason they do that is because the Bonanza Society promotes a program that they have developed within their type club called the Beechcraft Pilot Proficiency Program, that logo on the left side of your screen. So the Beechcraft Pilot Proficiency Program, which we call for short BPPP. So when you go to the Instructor Academy, the ABS Instructor Academy, you become what's known as a BPPP instructor. And the Pilot Proficiency Program is kind of like a flight review, an FAA flight review, which you do every couple of years, except that it's on steroids. It's very intense, it's very thorough. There is no pass-fail. It's only to, as volunteers, we're all volunteer instructors here, is to help people who own this particular type of airplane get the most benefit from their training and to help them become and maintain themselves as competent, safe pilots. That's the entire focus. That's all we care about. And people are very passionate who are ABS flight instructors. So we have a very rigorous program. You can look it up if you go to the ABS website, bonanza.org. And the other type clubs, they have similar programs. I haven't been with the other type clubs, but I can tell you that the ABS type club is very thorough, very professional, very focused, very passionate about what they do. And you can find out more on their website. After becoming an instructor and teaching for a while, and then trying to think about these ideas about airworthiness and aircraft records, I started asking a question at the beginning of our 2-day BPPP meeting with individual owners. We would sit down, usually, and I would sit down with someone who is a Bonanza owner. Very competent, stable people, maintain their airplanes well. They really cared about what they were doing because they spent the time, invested their time and a little bit of money into keeping their skill levels up. And we have a very rigorous schedule, which you can find out more about, or I'll help you about later if you're interested. But I would sit with this person who I did not know. We would meet for the first time. And I said, the first meeting, we're not going to fly. All we need to do is sort of get to know each other and to come up with a plan of what we're going to cover during the BPPP event. We're doing all the things we're going to cover. And then I thought about this program about airworthiness and aircraft records, and I said, there's a great question that should be asked, that I should ask of these owners before we get very far into this. So it became question number 1 during our first meeting in a BPPP training event. And I would say to the owner, John or Mary, or pick a name, doesn't matter. We've never met before. I really don't know you. You don't know me. I don't know your aircraft. I don't know anything about your records, its condition, or anything else. And the premise of this BPPP event, this flight training event, is for me to help you become a competent, proficient pilot. But let me start with asking you one question. Again, since I know nothing about you or your airplane, can you tell me in your own words why you believe, as the owner of this airplane, that this airplane is airworthy? That was the end of BPPP. It stopped right there because none of them could. I said, tell me in your own words. I mean, just why do you believe this is airworthy? What is it about the airplane that you as the owner can tell me to help me understand that you have an understanding of the criteria that makes this airworthy? I said, look, I don't know you. You don't know me. Why in heaven's name do you think I'm going to get in this airplane with you? And if you can't tell me why you think the airplane's airworthy, it's your airplane. And we came to a screeching halt on the first question. Now, it was not meant to be a trick question. It was not meant to upset the owner. It was meant to start a discussion about, well, okay, how would you answer that question? What goes into such an answer? And then we said, well, let's talk about responsibilities and about your documents and the condition of the airplane? I mean, so we would spend quite a lot of time on documents and records and finding massive holes in both, and also in the pre-flight. The pre-flights left a lot to be desired because there were things that were peculiar to that type of airplane that go above the general things one knows about doing pre-flights, and the owners really did not have a lot of knowledge about some idiosyncrasies, not idiosyncrasies, but special things about, in this case, a Bonanza aircraft. Now, there are special things about Cirrus airplanes. There are special things about Mooney aircraft. Each aircraft has its own characteristics, but they didn't. The point is that they didn't understand that, nor did they understand what their responsibility was and how to be able to articulate to someone that their airplane is airworthy before they took a new person with them in the airplane. I said, well, this is a showstopper because we need to raise the level of, at least afford them the opportunity to have some education in this area to understand why this is important and what is the need. So that's the background with the FAA safety team and the American Bonanza Society. So we started this review. We said, okay, let's look at the requirements from what we now call the Airman Certification Standards, the Private Pilot Airman Certification Standards. And I just pulled out one page from that. And it's not meant to be an eye chart here, but I've highlighted in yellow in this pre-flight preparation, section 1, task B on airworthiness requirements, the items related to the pilot/owner, not just the owner. This is what a pilot needs to know. If you're a renter, the general requirements, inspection required, what's able to be done, the general airworthiness requirements and compliance for airplanes. Remember, a renter needs to know this too. How do you prove airworthiness with respect to the airworthiness directives and the applicability of safety bulletins? How about, can you determine that the aircraft is airworthy in a scenario given by the evaluator? What would that mean? This aircraft is airworthy for day of VFR. It's not airworthy for night, or it's not airworthy for IFR, but it's perfectly fine for day VFR. So that's the scenario. We're going to do this at a certain time of day, and that's the evaluator or the instructor provides this information. And then the owner or the participant, student, needs to respond accordingly. But to do that, one needs an understanding of airworthiness and how records demonstrate that airworthiness. Okay, so this is the basis. Now, the next thing we need to do is say, well, maybe we can get some insight by looking at the regulations. Now, nobody likes looking at regulations. I don't like looking at regulations, but there are 3 regulations that provide some insight into this whole subject matter. The first of them is 91.7. Okay, so this is the operations. This is not 61, which has to do with the pilot. This has to do with operational things, so part 91. So 91.7 says what? Civil aircraft airworthiness, no person may operate a civil aircraft unless it is in an airworthy condition. Well, that's sort of like apple pie and motherhood, right? We know that. We learned that at one time, and everybody takes that for granted. Okay, you can't operate it unless it's an airworthy, but that means you as the pilot, whether or not you're the owner, you could be a renter, you could be a borrower, the pilot must understand that the airplane's in an airworthy condition. It also says in that same paragraph that the pilot in command of a civil aircraft is responsible for determining whether that aircraft is in a condition for safe flight. Okay, how do you do that? If you're a renter, you're going to a rental agency, an FBO or someplace that's going to rent you an airplane, or you're going to use, and if you're lucky, you have a friend who's got an airplane that you're going to borrow. Do they have a discrepancy list? Can you look through the logbooks? I mean, you can look through the logbooks. Doesn't mean you have to take them, doesn't mean you need to mark them up, but you can ask to look through them if you know what to look for. Would that not be considered your responsibility if you're going to take the keys and pilot an aircraft? Once you take the keys, whether you're an owner or a renter, you just bought the airplane. You said, I have done, by taking these keys and going out and flying this airplane, I, the pilot in command, take responsibility And I'm telling you that I have determined the aircraft is in a condition for safe flight. And I can tell you that most people do not do that. Okay, so that's 91.7. The next reg that can give us some insight is 91.103. What does 103 tell us? Well, 91.103 is sort of a catch-all, and it's a little disconcerting from a legal standpoint because it says that we're responsible for all available information concerning the flight. Anyone who studied this regulation understands that the way it's worded and the discussions about this subject is that the intent of this initially is that the pilot should be able, should have all the information relative to the departure airport and departure conditions, the en route conditions, altitudes, winds, and weather, and the conditions at the time of arrival for the airport and facilities and everything along the way, usually referring to a specific flight. But here's the problem. If you have a problem in a flight and have an incident or an accident, a lawyer is not going to be so choosy. A lawyer sees the word all, and that provides the basis for some possibly uncomfortable questions about what due diligence you did or did not do as the pilot in command. That's the conundrum. The third regulation that may offer some insight is 91.403. A little bit further down. Most of us have seen the early parts of Part 91. We've kind of gone through the first, the single numbers and the double and triple numbers, the 100s. But after that, we don't really spend a lot of time getting deeper into Part 91. But 91.403, way there in the back, has some other information. 91.103 says the owner or operator is primarily responsible for maintaining the aircraft in an airworthy condition. Okay? Now read that again. The owner or the operator is primarily responsible for maintaining that aircraft. It didn't say you have to do the maintenance. It says you're responsible for the maintenance. That means to ensure that it gets done. If you have the appropriate credentials, you're an A&P or you're an A&P IA, you can do the maintenance. But your job as the owner or operator is to make sure that the maintenance and the proper maintenance is getting done, and that you are able to tell someone or tell that it is getting done or not getting done. Okay, so that's what your first job is. You're responsible for maintaining the aircraft, ensuring that it's maintained in airworthy condition. But then it goes on to say in the same paragraph, what? Including compliance with Part 39 of this chapter. Well, what's Part 39? What's that about? Well, Part 39 is about airworthiness directives. And it tells you what airworthiness directives do and what they're for. Now, some of you understand, I understand some of you know a lot more about airworthiness directives than I'm going on here, but I'm assuming that some of the people at least who are listening this evening have not delved personally into ADs in any great depth other than they've heard one, they may have seen one, they don't really deal with them on a day-to-day basis, don't really understand them, haven't looked at them at many of them either. So what's in 14 CFR 39? Well, if you look, this is the whole table of contents. This is it, 39.1 through 39.27. And there are no specific airworthiness directives in Part 39. It just tells you things about airworthiness directives that is the basis of your knowledge of how to go look for, identify, read, and understand airworthiness directives and how they might apply to your aircraft. So look, for example, what is the legal effect of failing to comply with an airworthiness directive? An airworthiness directive is not optional. It's something that's posted by the FAA, and when it's posted and it's relevant to your airplane, it's not optional. It has specific compliance instructions. You can't elect to not do it, or you're flying a non-airworthy aircraft. Okay, what else does it talk about? In 39.15, does it apply if the product that the airworthiness directive is concerned with, if that has been changed? So there's a way to handle that, and 3915 will tell you how to deal with a product that's changed if there was an airworthiness directive about it. Let's look at 3923. Can you fly your aircraft to a repair facility to do the airworthiness directive before it's done? Or are you not in compliance? Well, yes, you can, but there are some ways to do that. It requires a special flight permit, and it tells you how to go about doing that. So this is really important. It's not a very long chapter, this part 39, but it's the basis for understanding how ADs work and how they might apply to you. Now, they are obviously going to be more important. This knowledge is going to be more important to aircraft owners than it is to renters, but it's a great knowledge base. And if any of you out there are flight instructors, this is really important, because as flight instructors, our job is to train people and to educate them about how some of this works. So for you flight instructors, I encourage you to, even if you're not an airplane owner, to understand some of this stuff so you can be a better asset to the folks who you are training and influencing in your role as a flight instructor. So this is part 39. This is all it is. It's just the background information. It's worth a read so you get an understanding. You don't have to memorize anything here. You're not going to be tested, but it's kind of important stuff. Knowing a bit more about these ADs can help you with risk management, knowing what's risky or not risky on the airplane that you intend to fly, okay? So risk management applies to you, and it doesn't matter whether you have a risk management responsibility, whether you're renting the airplane, borrowing your friend's airplane, or flying your own airplane. We are all involved in risk management, and that is to not do anything silly because of oversights and negligence and lack of knowledge. So risk management is going to apply to every one of us. So here's some risk management questions. What do you need to know about aircraft records and airworthiness if you're the owner or the pilot of an aircraft? So this is a specific body of knowledge that you are going to be looking for in your role as an owner or an owner pilot. That changes slightly if you're a non-owner pilot or a renter or a borrower, okay? So there's a little bit different complexion of how this works depending upon what you're doing. Now, you may never be an aircraft owner, you may be a renter for your whole life. That does not absolve you from knowing about the subject. It means you need to know certain things, maybe not in the depth that the owner would or the maintenance person, but it's really important for you as a renter to make sure you've got a safe airplane. Okay, that's part one. Now, let's talk a little bit about the difference between aircraft records and maintenance records. They're not the same. So, aircraft records fall in the realm of things that maybe your flight instructor didn't teach you about. You may have learned about some log books and maintenance books, but you probably didn't have training during your pilot's training, your initial pilot training about aircraft records, okay? You may have learned about or seen an airframe logbook or an engine logbook or propeller logbook or some other compendium of information about the airplane that you're taking instruction in during your flying training. So the things you've seen maybe are the aircraft engine propeller logbooks. Those are called maintenance records. By the way, they are not required. There is no requirement in any regulation that an airplane have or an owner have and maintain an aircraft log, an engine log, and a propeller log. These are books of convenience. You can put all your aircraft records, all your propeller and engine records in one box. You can have them all together. You can put them in file folders. You can put them in a shoebox. You can put them in an old boot. The FAA doesn't care. The books, however, are a way to keep things nice and neat, but they're not required. It's just a good way to do it. But we call the information you put in these log books, those are maintenance records. Now, aircraft records, on the other hand, are more than maintenance records. So you could have a flight log, the papers that are in the back of your aircraft, the airworthiness certificate, the registration, other documents that are not maintenance documents are part of the larger set of documents called aircraft records. So maintenance records are aircraft records, but there's many, many more things that constitute the records for a particular aircraft. And that's what we're going to look at. The maintenance stuff is fairly straightforward, and that's going to be a totally different presentation by someone else. But I'm going to talk about the larger scope of this subject area. Okay, this is a good time to talk about ARROW. ARROW is an acronym we all learned at the very beginning here during private pilot, we should have learned about, and it stands for certain things. So ARROW has to do with, first of all, the A is for airworthiness, that your responsibility as a pilot in command is you're responsible for the airworthiness of the aircraft. But they didn't tell you what that actually meant, other than you do a pre-flight, yeah, kick the tires, light the fire, yeah, it looks good, nothing's falling off, we're done. Not so fast. Does not quite work like that. But, you know, this is a subject that gets rushed frequently during flight training. Granted, there's a lot of things on the table during the time you're in flight training, and people have to prioritize what's important. So what we do during flight training for primary flight training is focus on the basic things to get you to become a basically competent and safe pilot with not too much other information, because there's only so much time. We're trying to do this in the least amount of time, the least amount of money on your part, so that you have at the end a pilot certificate, which is nothing more than a license to learn. So we don't talk about airworthiness a whole lot. We give you some perfunctory information, you know, how to do a pre-flight. We say, here's the books, this is this is what an AD looks like in the book. We don't really talk about what does it all mean and what is your responsibility. So this parenting class, as I'm calling it, is the next step after you've had that initial exposure. The first R in ARROW is going to be registration. And you notice I put an S over it because there apparently is more than one registration that one needs to consider when you're looking at this acronym ARROW. There is, of course, what? The FAA N number registration of your aircraft. Or if you're in another country, it's not going to be N, it's going to be a different letter. But whatever the federal registration is for your airplane, I will assume it's an N number. We'll talk about that, but it could mean anybody's registration. But what else gets registered besides the aircraft? The engine doesn't get registered, the propeller doesn't get registered. You do have a registration, however, for a 406 megahertz beacon, and that's a registration document. If you fly to Canada or Mexico, you have another thing. You have a registration for your radio telephone operation. So you must have a third-class radio telephone operator permit, and that's another registration. So there's possibly more than one registration, but at least have the one registration. What's the next R? The radio license, that's what we talked about. It's optional. Sometimes ARROW will not include this because you're only going to fly in the continental direct United States. You're not going to Canada or Mexico. Don't need to be concerned with a radio license. But if you want to do that someday, maybe we need to think about, well, how do you go about that today? We used to know it pretty well a long time ago when I first started flying, which is around the time they invented the wheel and fire. But we don't talk much about radio licenses these days. The O is for operating limitations. So what is the operating limitations? Well, is it the POH? Could be. But what's the legal requirement? The legal requirement is you must carry in the airplane flight manual, which includes all of the documents in addition to the POH, which would be things like STCs. The full STC must be included in the documents of the airplane, on board the airplane, and all the operating limitations that go with those documents. Now you get a Bonanza POH, and it's like an airplane flight manual. It has many things in it besides the basic 8 or 9 sections there that are in most flight manuals these days. And obviously there is some slack because if you've got an older airplane, the flight manual is quite flimsy and may not have all the sections, but you have whatever was available with that aircraft at the time it came into this world, whether it was experimental or a type certificated airplane. You have whatever documents, and of course the early Cessnas and early Pipers had pretty flimsy POHs, but that's all there was at the time. But whatever those operating limitations are, your responsibility is to understand where they are, what they are, and how they affect your flying. And the W is for weight, under weight and balance. Okay, so there's the ARROW document, ARROW documents. Seems all pretty innocuous. Let's talk about this a little bit more. Under weight and balance, what else is there? In order to do weight and balance, you need to know what's in the airplane. Now, granted, you can put an airplane on a set of scales and measure the weight and determine the CG and do a rudimentary weight and balance, not knowing specifically what's on the airplane. And you can get away with that. And then if you change something, you have to weigh it again. But typically, every airplane that's type certificated comes, that is, when I say that, it means comes from a manufacturer, a Piper, a Cessna, Beechcraft, Cirrus, etc. When it comes to you the very first time, or to the owner, the very first owner, it has with it an equipment list, which is nothing more than a sort of a spreadsheet looking type of document, which lists every piece of equipment, its serial number type of thing. It also has its weight and its position relative to whatever the datum point, the reference point is for that aircraft. So we call that the moment number, or the ARM. So you're gonna have those three pieces of information. The name of the piece of equipment may or may not have other defining information like serial number, model number, but it will have the piece of equipment, the name of it, and the weight and the ARM or moment in the equipment list. Now, if your airplane's 50 years old, the equipment list could very well have gotten lost. And we all know that. So people say, well, I guess I don't need an equipment list. Well, that's not exactly, well, it is quite true. You don't need an equipment list, but you can make one fairly easily. We have computers today, and a spreadsheet and numbers and Apple numbers or Microsoft Excel, pretty simple to do a spreadsheet that just logs all your equipment. Now, you don't have to do this in one day, in one sitting. You can make up a basic equipment list yourself and have your maintenance vendor help you with filling in some of the blanks and use that as the basis for doing the weight and balance activity. Alternatively, if you have a type certificated airplane, you can go back to the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM, and for some small fee, they should be able to issue you a copy of the original equipment list that came with that airplane. That may or may not be a good idea. If your airplane is 50 years old, it's highly unlikely that many of the items that were on the original equipment list, your Omega system, your Loran system, things that may have been there, your very early radio systems probably have all been torn out and put new stuff in there right now. So it's, do you want to spend money on that, or do you want to just start from scratch and put a new equipment list together? The point is, have something that documents what's in your airplane. If you can't find it, you say, okay, well, how can I get my arms as the owner? How can I get my arms around that information in a meaningful way? Not asking you to necessarily do all the work yourself, but it's kind of nice to start putting together some things and say, okay, what would be in this aircraft? I have certain kinds of radios. I have Avidyne or some Garmin radios up front. I've got the special deflectors. I put some kind of things on my wing to help with the airflow. I've done some things to the tail. I put strakes on the bottom, whatever it is. The things that are pretty obvious that you have on the airplane, and then the basic information on the aircraft and the engine. That's what's going to be in your equipment list. All of these things, by the way, are part of this compendium, this set of documents that you're putting together called aircraft records. So if you're an owner, many of the owners that I've seen, I'm not going to say everybody in the audience has got this situation for the owners on this webinar this evening, but there is a high likelihood that if you're an owner, there's a good chance that you have one or two duffel bags or something equivalent to that with stuff strewn in these bags in no discernible form, just piled in randomly here and there. You have these aircraft records, but they're not organized anything. And matter of fact, many of the people that I have worked with and asked about this subject really are pretty clueless about what's in the bag. They know that's a bag of records, and they just give the bag to their maintenance person at the time of the annual, and the maintenance person has to go through it and try to make sense out of it. Guess what? That costs you money, because the maintenance person has got to spend time going through your bag of strewn records, trying to make heads or tails of whether you have the basic documents and records to support the annual. You have to pay for that. So my premise to you is if you could take a small step, put that together in some at least rudimentary fashion to help facilitate that activity at the beginning of your annual inspection, you could save some money. And if you find something you don't understand, go to your maintenance vendor and say, I don't understand how this works. You do it one time, you get your arms around it, and then in the future, it will not cost you money every annual to try to get your handle around these things. Okay, so there's the Arrow documents. The last subject I want to cover this evening is part 4 is pilot and command owner responsibilities. This is as far as we're going to go tonight. The beginning of the next webinar, which is this Thursday evening, same time, we're going to go into renter responsibilities, and I guarantee you there's going to be some things there that will surprise you that I almost guarantee you've never seen before. But let's talk about the pilot and command or pilot and command owner responsibilities here briefly. You know that the airplane has to have an airworthiness certificate and a registration certificate, and they're usually someplace not in the front of the airplane. They're usually in the back, maybe behind the pilot's seat, maybe on a side wall or the back wall of the cabin, somewhere in maybe a little plastic container, someplace that you carry these. You must have it on the aircraft. So let me tell you this real story. I'm going through and I'm doing instruction in some small 4-passenger single-engine airplanes, a typical variety that we do training in, Piper and Cessna products. And I always ask the owner for, let me see your airworthiness certificate, let me see your registration. And what am I looking for? Well, I'm looking for the issuance date, and that date says 1995. This is a current certificate, by the way. So is this airplane airworthy because it has this airworthiness certificate in it? The answer is no. This certificate says the aircraft was airworthy only on 8/10/95. On 8/11/95, it could be unairworthy, and for every date thereafter, it's unairworthy. But this certificate is a legal requirement that must be in the aircraft. It's not saying anything that except that on the day this certificate was issued, at that moment, and only that moment, this airplane was airworthy. Now, some other things. Please look at the N number in the upper left. They don't have a red box around it, okay? And the serial number in box number 3. I've had at least 2 occasions in the last 5 years to look at the owner's airworthiness certificate, and these numbers didn't match the N number on the airplane. Guess what? Our training event is now immediately canceled. I'm not flying the airplane if we don't have the right airworthiness certificate. Now, I'm not saying who's at fault here. Something got switched, something got changed, but right now, this airplane, which is not November 2631 Alpha, it's November 1234 Bravo, doesn't have a matching airworthiness certificate. Something's gone astray. I don't know what it is, but it's not right. So as an instructor, I'm going to ask you for that, to look at it to see whether something has inadvertently gotten messed up. I don't know what it is. I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone. It's just to say we've got a discontinuity here that we need to address or needs to be addressed before we can fly the airplane legally. I will not fly the airplane until this paperwork is proper. Not going to do that. Okay. The other document which you have is the registration certificate. It has the same thing. It was registered on such and such date. This is a fictitious name and thing. But again, what you're looking for is you want to make sure that the N number matches the registration number that's actually printed on the airplane, and that the serial number does the same thing, okay? Those are really, really important. Now on this page, you'll notice that there's a web link. Many of you are familiar with FAAsafety.gov. John Collins talked about that at the beginning as to how to get your wings credit. On the home page of FAAsafety.gov is a way to check your registration number and make sure you have the right information and that the right information is actually in the FAA master records system. That's another thing. So if you came to me as a flight instructor and say, Mike, would you do a flight review with me? I'm going to say, okay, give me your tail number and your registration and your serial number, your N number and serial number. And then as soon as we get off the phone on the initial call, I'm going to go to that FAA registration site. I'm going to look up this number, make sure the numbers match, make sure I'm you're the person who owns the airplane, that everything else is in order, that this registration hasn't expired, that there's nothing obtuse about the airplane, that you have the appropriate codes, and I'm just going to make sure that the numbers match so that when we do meet face to face, I can look and verify that the paperwork is in order, okay? And why shouldn't you do that? You can do the same thing. It's very easy to do. I'm going to show you how to do that in just a moment. Okay, and also it's a Cessna 150L. Now this particular, I'm going to use a Cessna 150L for some examples when we get further on in the, not tonight, but in one of the subsequent webinars. We're going to talk about looking up information on a particular type of airplane. I'm going to use a 150L just as an example for the purposes, illustrative purposes for this webinar. Okay, and then I'm going to look and see if it's got the right name and address. Now, the registration has to be done. In the past few years, they've increased the frequency with which registrations need to be updated. And so if your registration is still due, there may or may not be an address discontinuity here. But when you redo your registration, you should put in your actual current address. So that's one of the things we're going to look into if I see that the address doesn't match your current address of record. So this is the homepage of FAAsafety.gov. You're all familiar with it. Now, the information that's going to help you most during this entire webinar series is free, and it does not require you to have an account or to log in to FAAsafety.gov. Now, I encourage you to do it. It's actually a great website. There's a lot of good things you can get on this website. I have an account. Many people have accounts. Then you fill that in the upper right-hand side, the block in the upper right there. You put in your email address, password. You create an account like you do for any other website that has an account. And it's free. And it gives you access to some great information that really can help you if you spend a little time once in a while looking at it. But for the purposes of tonight, we don't need to do that. I just want you to look at the homepage. And in particular, I want you to look near the bottom of this homepage to this area, not the login, but down here, which is called the Quick Links section. All of these are hyperlinks to specific pieces of information that is going to be your shortcut to the world in this whole webinar series. Really, really important. Again, you don't have to sign on. It's here, it's on the homepage, and we're going to be referring to this Quick Links section continuously during these the four parts of this webinar, okay? This is what it looks like. I blew it up so you can see it. And for purposes here, please note here that the FAA registry aircraft inquiry, this is where you can look up the N number. Now, today, by the way, it had some problems. I talked to the folks that run this website earlier this morning. They realized there was a broken link here. They have a new link. We talked about the new link that will actually work better, and it will take another day or two, but you should be able to look up the aircraft registry directly from here. Now, this is a set of shortcuts. You can always look up the N number directly on FAA.gov. That's always possible. This just gives you, this section of the homepage of FAAsafety.gov is a series of shortcuts that eliminate you taking multiple steps through the FAA's website to get to the same point. So it's really handy to have this page bookmarked so you can get to this one section to help you through the rest of the webinar series here, okay? That's how that works. So what are the components of airworthiness? The components of airworthiness, we talked about the airworthiness certificate, the registration, and how to look those things up. So the other components are, do you have documentation that the aircraft has had an annual inspection? If you are using the aircraft in a business, like you lease it out for flight training and it's used for some commercial purpose, such as flight training, you might also need to have a 100-hour check. Do you have requirements for an oil change, and are they documented someplace in those logbooks or whatever system you're using to document aircraft, engine, propeller maintenance activities? So those are three things that would be components of airworthiness in addition to the airworthiness certificate and the registration. What other things you might consider? Well, do you need a pedostatic check? Well, the answer is it depends. You don't need a pedostatic check if you're flying an experimental light sport airplane and your day VFR only. It's a good idea to know if your pedostatic system is working, but you don't necessarily need to have it. When do you need to have it? It's in the regulations. You need to have it if you're going to be doing IFR flights or something that requires more definite control of the instruments in the aircraft for the flight type of activity that you're doing. But for basic VFR, you don't technically need one. You need to look that up in the regulations of when a pedostatic check is required for your particular aircraft and for your particular aircraft operation. What else goes into airworthiness? You might want to have a transponder check. When do you need a transponder? Well, you can get away without a transponder at all in certain parts of the country. Now with ADS-B, you need to know when transponders are required. There are many people that do not have transponders in their aircraft, which is fine if you're out in the very rural parts of the country. But if you're going to be flying near controlled airspace, D or C or Bravo airspace or terminal areas, then you have to have a transponder because it's part and parcel of the ADS-B, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast system that is required now in those particular airspaces. And there is a transponder check that goes along with that. What else? Well, you might have an ELT, an emergency locator transmitter. There's two types, as most of you, I think, understand. The original ones that we've been using for 50 odd years or so is a VHF frequency ELT, emergency locator transmitter, and it operates on 121.5 megahertz, which is VHF, and some of them also operate on 243.0 megahertz, which is the emergency frequency in the UHF band. Now, general aviation doesn't use UHF. That's typically for special use and military, but some of these units, many of these units may broadcast on both simultaneously, but you are only concerned with 121.5. The newer ELTs do not work, but the older ones on 121.5 and 243 are line of sight. They work just like your aircraft radio. And so there are some technical issues with reception. If you've had an airplane go down and you want somebody to find you and the signal can only broadcast line of sight, it does limit where you can be seen. And so there are newer versions of the ELTs. The yellow ones that you see on the right there are 406 megahertz transponder ELTs. And 406 megahertz works through a system called COPSIS, which is a satellite system which provides you much better coverage and more definitive location capabilities. And the question is, do you have an ELT? Well, then there's requirements in the regulations for checking the batteries, checking the system on some periodic basis, and it's in the regulations. But the question is, if you've got one, it's part of your airworthiness determination. So how are we going to start? This is a really important part. This will be a good thing to think about before we meet on Thursday, if you can start this. And that is, I'd like you to consider making a summary sheet for the make, model, and serial numbers of as many pieces of the airframe, engine, propeller, and appliances that you can. What are appliances? Okay, we all understand what airframe, engine, and propeller are. What's an appliance? Suppose you have speed brakes on your wing. So I had a Bonanza that I flew, was not mine, a friend of mine's. It had speed brakes. That's an appliance. It had a pneumatic door seal around the entry door for the Bonanza on the right side. An extra door seal was not part of the original airframe. It was an automatically inflatable door seal. That's an appliance. I've got a Garmin radio that I put to replace my old King radio in the dashboard. That's an appliance, okay? So there are things that have ADs and have some service bulletins and have information that you need to know or keep track of. And the best way to do that is have a crib sheet, your note sheet of getting all the serial numbers and model numbers in one place on a single sheet of paper. And once you have that crib sheet, it makes life just a whole lot easier. So let me show you an example what that might look like. This is the one that I created for this old 1967 V-35 Bonanza that I flew for a number of years. Not my airplane, but I started making the note sheet, and this is what it looked like sort of at the beginning. Very basic, airframe, engine, propeller. Now, I printed it on green paper. I had a reason for doing that. You can put it on any color you want, but I used that because I used this paper not one time as my master notes page or my master go-to page with all the serial numbers and model numbers, but I used it as a divider between sections of the document I was going to put together with all these pieces of information. So the color code helped me differentiate differentiate sections of the document where I put everything in one place. So I used green, doesn't mean you have to use green, it's just what I did. But you can see where it starts. Airframe, engine, propeller. You get those get that information down. What other things do you have? If you've got a movable propeller, in other words, a constant speed or a adjustable speed propeller, then you may have a prop governor. If you have a prop governor, what can you find out about there? I didn't know who the manufacturer was, but I did find out the model and serial number. If you have an alternator, how big is the alternator? How many? It's 12 volts, 70, 100, 150 amps. What's the model number? Who makes it? What's the serial number? If you have an air pump, if you have magnetos, you have two magnetos typically, right? So you're going to have a left and right magneto, document that. So this is a starting point. Once you have this paper, life becomes immeasurably easier. For the gyrocopter, I've done that, but I've had, actually, since that Bonanza wasn't mine, but the gyrocopter this is my gyrocopter. So I have created a sheet and I keep adding things as I learn about different pieces of it. Since I maintain the gyrocopter, I built it, I have a repairman certificate. So I take it apart, every 100 hours. I was able to look up all these numbers, and I just, as I get them, it's a work in progress. I keep adding to my sheet. I do this in Microsoft Word. It's really simple. You can do it in any word processing application you have. Just make it up and make it in a format that works for you, not my format, but some format where you can keep track of all the numbers, preferably on one page, something like this, because that's your go-to piece of paper. That's going to help everything. I just want to show you what it looks like. At the end of the program, after the fourth webinar, I'm going to tell you about a series of handouts, which will include a Microsoft Word master blank document laid out somewhat like this that you can use as a starting point if you don't want to make your own. I will be happy to give that to you for free as part of some extra materials at the end. But it's really simple to do this. Just start gathering all the data and putting it in one place. And if you want that format, we'll be getting that. John Collins will get that out to you after the fourth webinar, okay? That's how that works. The other thing you might want to create is start putting together what I call the recurring items list for your particular end number airplane. So take a screenshot of this. This is an example of what it might look like. So I've got the aircraft registration number. When is the registration due? That's going to be on that page you get from the end number lookup of your airplane. When is your registration due? Okay, so it was last registered. This airplane, this V35, was registered in 2009. I did this project, I remember 2014 or something, and so it was due in 2018 at that time. So this is not current, it's just an example. So the next registration update was supposed to be in 2018. When is the annual due? Well, the last annual was on June 2016, so it's due, and it was late, it was due on 4/30 of 17. Okay, when's the next 100-hour due if that's appropriate? When is your next oil change? Now, when you look beyond that, by the way, the annual and the 100-hour, they have a reference. Where is the requirement for the annual? Where is the requirement for the 100-hour? On the reference column, you'll see it's 43409 for both of those. When you get down to the ELTs and the transponder and the pedostatic checks, you can see the references. There's paragraph 91207C and D, and 91411 and 413 for pedostatic and transponder. And by having this all in one place, and it's easy with a word processor, you have your hands on top of everything. You know when stuff becomes due. The hardest part is making the first copy. Once you get the first copy, piece of cake after that. But start putting it together slowly, and then you'll have it at your fingertips, and it will help you immensely. What else? Weight and balance. Got to get your weight and balance information together. Get your equipment list. Now, this is the spreadsheet, so this is a typical equipment list. You can put an item number on the left. You put the description of the item, what it is. It's, in this case, a Continental Engine 0200A. It has a weight, and it has an arm relative to the datum. There's your spreadsheet. So weight times arm equals what? Moments. You have the Excel or some equivalent spreadsheet program do the computations for you automatically. That's what I do. I don't ever fill it in. It's all done automatically. I make the spreadsheet one time, have some fun doing that, and then it's done. If I change something, I just change one thing, bam, it just figures out all the changes. Propeller, spinner, generator, battery, you see, you just lay down all the things in the airplane, just make a list. That's the equipment list. Other registrations, we talked about the N number. If you have an ELT that's a 406 megahertz, you don't have to register 121.5. If you have 406, you need to go to NOAA, the NOAA website, and just do a search in your search engine for ELT registration, and you'll get something like this. So the 406 megahertz beacon registration, and the form that will come up when you go to this website or find this website, it's going to look like this. This is a fill it in online form. You can print it out and do it by hand if you want, or you can fill it in on the computer face itself. All these blue shaded areas are actual active fields, and you can just fill in the data and submit it. Now, in my ELT, I didn't do this because my vendor, the person who made the ELT that I use, which in my case was an Artex, they custom tailored an application form instead of this one that would go to NOAA and do that. They had a little different form. But if you don't have anybody to do that for you, this is the basic form and what it's going to look like. Pretty simple. Okay, it just grit your teeth, just go through it, just fill it in, send it in, you're good to go. The other permit you might need, the other registration, is your radio operator's permit. Again, we talked about that if you're going to go to Canada or Mexico outside of the continental United States, and that's called an FCC Form 605. You can look that up. Just do a Google search in FCC Form 605. It's not automatic. It looks like this. You have to print it out and then use your pen and fill it in and then send it in. And I believe, don't hold me to this, the last time I checked, I think it was about $70 to submit and get this radio permit done. And you do it one time, and I don't even know how long it lasts. I had one many years ago, a long time. I don't have one now because I don't have a need to go to those places. But this is what it looks like. It's pretty simple to do. And again, your flight instructor should be able to help you with this if you need to do it. Okay.
Hey,
FCC
Mike, we had a question, if you don't mind, about the FCC, the radio operator permit, the restricted radio telephone operator permit. If you had one, and I know when I started flying back in the mid 80s, I got one, and fortunately, I think I can still put my hands on mine, but one of our attendees asked the question, if we've lost that, misplaced that, is it possible to get a replacement from them, or do we have to go through and do a whole new application?
Yes. The answer is, I don't know, John. I mean, the question is, it's, if it's old, it may not apply to the same airplane. I mean, unless you can resurrect the number or have somehow managed in forethought to save the number, a registration number that they might have given you so they could trace it. But the chances, if it's 30 years old, we didn't have really lots of depth in computer technology at that point in time, and being able to find something that was maybe done only on paper 30 years ago, it's probably less grief and aggravation to suck it in, spend the $70, just get a new one and move out. So it's up to you. It depends what your pain level threshold is.
Sure, I've seen a few comments come in, and William, thank you for throwing that in. Definitely, as you know, that permit is good for life, but getting a replacement costs about the same as the new one. So might as well just get the new one and be done with it. So there we go. Thanks, Mike.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay, we're just about done here. Operating limitations. So with type certificate data sheets, and in the TCDS, it's going to talk about placards, the POH, and the flight manual. What else is in your aircraft records? Any major alterations. So your supplemental type certificates, 337s, supplements to the airplane flight manual, any placards. And again, a lot of this information comes from that section at the bottom of FAAsafety.gov. You can find most of this information down in that section. We're going to go through that in subsequent webinars. Again, this is what the section looks like. So there's I've highlighted some of the areas, the initial registry information on the bottom right, airworthiness directives above that, and then in column 2, information about type certificate data sheets and STCs. We'll cover that next time. We'll cover TCDS next time, and supplemental type certificates in the third webinar presentation. Okay. By the way, there's other information here that's not related to the subject. Here's a great place to get an airport diagram or to look up terminal procedures about where you're going to fly, not related to airworthiness and aircraft records, but great flight information if you want it. It's right here. It's free. It's a quick link to get you that information. So a great place to start. Okay. Guess what? We're done. Okay, John, back to you.
All right, thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. A lot of great information there. And one of our attendees commented, it's like getting a peek behind the screen of what's going on, all the dirty little secrets that we need to know about, which is great. Got a bunch of questions here. And I'm going to go back to the beginning for you, Mike. Somebody actually answered your question. Well, what is it that makes an airplane airworthy? And they were pretty much on track. Airworthiness certificate, compliance with all ADs, and current annual inspection. So, Lynn, thank you for that. Appreciate that comment. Doug had a question, and we may touch on this maybe, and it might be in part 4. So if it is, let me know, Mike. But are there any digital record keeping options for GA aircraft, like you scan into the documents and data entry, the info and inspection tracking, or is this all really going to be an exercise in spreadsheets and Word documents and stuff like that?
I have been led to believe that there are some digital options. However, when I checked last, which has been several years, the difficulty is that getting to the point where you're comfortable going with the digital options appeared to me to take more work than actually just doing it. The end almost didn't justify the means, because with so much work setting up the system to be a digital system. Now, granted, when you put all these documents together, the big effort is at the beginning, because this becomes largely a historical document that you don't need to refer to every day. And the learning comes from you doing the sorting and assembling and the finding and the correlating of putting the document together in the first place. That's where you learn about what's going on with your airplane. The digitization, I mean, if that is what makes you happy, I believe there are digital solutions that you can find. I am not personally familiar with them. But my question is, what are you trying to do before you spend a lot of time thinking about how the computer can do this? Just start manually. See if you can find some of the documents. You want to run before you can walk. The problem is finding the documents and getting your arms on them and learning how to read them. Not so much where you're going to store them. If you want to store them digitally, that's fine. But the real issue is getting your hands about what is this document? What does it look like? What does it do? What do I need to know from this document that relates to the airworthiness of my airplane?
Okay. All right, great, thank you. Dayton had a question back on slide 30. Well, actually, I'm sorry, that was what we were talking about, the radio operator license, excuse me. Slide 31, David's comment had always understood that the A in Aero is airworthiness certificate document. Also thought that all the operating limitations must be in the POH. For example, an STC may contain a POH supplement, so the O really means operating handbook. I think you've gone into a little more detail on that, if I remember correctly.
Well, yeah, the operating manual is, the operational limitations is what you find. I'm not exactly sure what the regs say. I probably should have looked this up. Someone had challenged me on it before, whether the POH or the airplane flight manual must be in the airplane, and whatever that document is in the airplane must include a complete copy of every STC. And whether you call it a flight manual or a POH, the problem is frequently the POHs, especially with airplanes that are more than 20 years old, is not the complete flight manual. And you need to use common sense here. If you have a 3-page POH in your airplane, is that really enough? I mean, and I don't need to tell someone what to do. I mean, what do you think it should be?
Right.
What do you think the right answer should be? It's you need to have something in there that tells you about the things that are important for the airplane. How do the systems operate in the airplane? Not just the basic checklists for normal procedures and emergency procedures and cold starts and hot starts and servicing. But what else do you need to know?
Yeah.
About special things about your radios, et cetera. So the question is, take a look at it. If you've got a specific question, it's really not appropriate to address it here, but I will be happy to help anyone who wants to have a specific question. We can do that offline. My contact information is on the bottom left. And if you have something, please send me an email and I'll be happy to chat with you. But the answer is each case is different and it depends.
Yep. Okay. Couple questions related to, actually more than a couple questions related to weight and balance. First one is, how often does a GA aircraft have to be weighed? are there any FAA requirements? And my understanding is that a GA aircraft, no, not necessarily. An aircraft with a certain number of seats, and I want to say it's 20 perhaps, maybe less, used in Part 135 is every 36 months. And I believe large aircraft have to have that same requirement. Do you have any further information on that, Mike?
Yeah, the best of my knowledge, you only have to have a current weight and balance form. Now, they don't expire. If you never change anything, I mean, if you're still flying with an Omega system and you know your 1940s King radios, then you don't need a weight and balance. I mean, the point is, if you change something, if it's negligible, you can think about it. If you change anything important, maybe you want to look at that. And that's a great discussion question to have with your maintenance vendor.
Mm-hmm.
Because the answer is, again, it depends. If you've only done some minor things, but if you've made any of a wing modification, or you've added an air conditioner, you've put different seats in the airplane, maybe put some these nice fancy seats that I forget the name of the manufacturer makes. There's a really good company that makes wonderful seats, and people have upgraded their seats, make it more comfortable. They put some kind of air conditioning pack in the airplane or does something. Yeah, you probably need to reweigh it. And it's not a big deal, but again, common sense. And this is a great subject to talk with your maintenance vendor.
Yeah. Okay. Here's if flying an experimental light sport, which equipment do I put into the equipment list, and do I need to determine the arm for each piece of equipment?
Light sport is it's an experimental category. Experimental has very lax rules. No one says you need an equipment list for that. You don't need to do anything. It's experimental. You can put stuff in or not. You can not have an equipment list. I'm suggesting to you that it's required, of course, for type certificated airplanes with a type certificate data sheet or a TCDS. That's everything that's built by a manufacturer. That's going to be a Beechcraft, a Piper, a Mooney, a Cessna, whatever. If it's experimental, which is everything else, which means kit builds and home builds airplanes, there's no requirements to do any of this.
Okay.
To the best of my knowledge. Now, does that mean it's not a good idea? No, I have an equipment list. I have a weight and balance in my gyrocopter. I'm not required to have it to the best of my knowledge, but I have it because it says this is a good idea. I should do this because for one thing, I want to know about what's going on and where my limitations are. But I think you have a lot more flexibility, and we need to look at the specific requirements in the experimental aircraft or kit-built aircraft section of the regulations to determine what requirements pertain to you. But there aren't very many in the experimental world.
Okay. SK has a question. Wants to know, how do I get a complete list of ADs that is applicable to the specific serial number of the airplane?
Aha! That, sir, is why you should listen on Thursday. We're going to cover that in detail, specifically your question. I'm going to show you how to do it. It's surprisingly easy, but no one's ever showed you how to do it. I'm going to show you how to do it with a specific example, and once you see how you do it, all you need to do is spend a little time. I'm going to show you exactly how to go about it.
Okay. All right. Well, that's something to look forward to. I know we've got a lot of questions coming in about wings credit, so let me address that pretty quickly here. If you signed up for tonight's webinar and you use the email address that you use on FAAsafety.gov for that account, that the wings credit will automatically go to your account. We'll do that probably tomorrow or maybe Thursday morning at the latest. If you didn't sign in with it, you have my email address on the registration email that you got, john.collins@aopa.org. Just send me your email that you use on FAAsafety.gov, and I'll make sure that I add that to our credit list as well. There will be a recording of this webinar, and we will post that on our website at webinars.aopa.org. That should go up tomorrow afternoon at the latest, and it will show up as the first webinar in the listing there. And if you don't see it, just filter for ASI webinars and you'll see it there. let me take control back for a moment, Mike.
Yeah, just before you do that, John,
Sure.
here's the schedule again. So here's what we covered this evening.
Yes.
We covered the 4 parts. What we're going to cover on Thursday is the part about renters, and we're going to start, the whole program is going to be based upon starting with the type certificate data sheets. We'll do both of those on Thursday, and then we will, just to clarify, I said something incorrect a moment ago. We're not going to do airworthiness directives until Tuesday, but understanding airworthiness directives will come from understanding what comes before that, which is the TCDS, the type certificate data sheet. So that's, just want to show people where we are and where we're going next time. You got it back.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me switch over to my screen here very quickly. All right, so we talked about the WINGS credit. Also, if you are participating in the AOPA Pilot Passport program, which is part of the AOPA app, this webinar and the subsequent 3 webinars will each get you a webinar badge and 1,000 points. So we have a code for each night, and that is ASI Web 051821 for tonight. And that is available only until the end of the month. All these codes will expire at the end of the month. June will start again with a different code for our June webinar. But you can redeem it by going to the Pilot Passport in your AOP app and entering that code. Let me give you a quick run through on how that works. So go to the AOP app on your device, and you can see in the upper left-hand corner there is a menu. Tap on that. And then when that comes open, tap on Pilot Passport, and then My Pilot Passport. Then in My Pilot Passport, tap on My Points and Badges and scroll down to the bottom to redeem affiliate code. Tap that, and when that opens up, go ahead and enter the webinar code in the affiliate code space, and then tap Redeem Code. Remember, redeem it by May 31st. It goes away at the end of the month. And again, ASI Web 051821, and that will get you that cute little badge there. I do want to mention that we thank you for watching. This is a very important and good information to get out there. And ASI Safety Education, we are not funded through member dues. We are funded primarily through donations to the AOPA Foundation. So if you enjoyed this and you want to contribute, you want to keep helping us to bring important safety information to the general aviation community, please go to aopafoundation.org and you'll find a link that you can donate through there. Tonight, we were sponsored in part by Sporty's Pilot Shop. We really appreciate their support. They're supporting our webinar series through August. And in August, they will be presenting one of the webinars for us. So just a shout out to Sporty's. Thank you for your support. We've had a great relationship with them over the years and just really appreciate all that they do for us in general aviation. If you're not an AOPA member and you enjoyed this webinar and you want to become an AOPA member, I'd encourage you to do that. Go to aopa.org/join today. And we can do that. And we'll be happy to have you part of the world's largest general aviation organization and enjoy your support. And thank you for that. Our next webinar, as Mike mentioned, our next one is Thursday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern time. So please show up for that. If you have any issues about trying to get into that, please let us know. We'll be happy to try to take care of that for you. The same webinar link that you used tonight will get you into the webinar on Thursday. So we set it up as a series, so you only have to do one registration. You'll be able to get into all 4 sessions. So that brings us to an end. On behalf of myself and Mike and the AOPA Air Safety Institute, all of us here at AOPA, I want to thank you for watching and wish you a good evening, and please fly safe.